Hello, I'm Scott Soshnick.
And I'm Eben Novi-Williams, and this is the Huskies vs. Wolverines sports business podcast, the Sporticast.
You want a mulligan?
No, we're going with that.
This is the Huskies versus Wolverine. Really?
I know you're excited about the national championship game, Scott.
Seriously? That's it?
I was thinking about doing something with the Notre Dame, the Michigan fight song, which is the Leaders of the West, right?
Yeah.
I always thought that was funny because
You should have played it.
Michigan is no longer that far west. We'll do that we'll do that when they win.
Hail to the victors.
Yeah, that's Michigan. Hail to the
victors, yeah. What did I do? Notre Dame?
Yeah, I think you did Notre Dame.
Whatever.
Do you want a mulligan, Scott?
I don't want a mulligan. I'm tired, my friend. I don't want a mulligan. I actually watched a little bit of the games, though, so that was like new for me.
I was laughing that we had Bill Hancock, the guy who runs the playoff on the podcast last week, and one of the things he said about timing and ratings and all that, he was like, just give me 2 good games. That's all I want. And he got
2 real good
two games that literally went down to the final play on both of them. A dream for the college football playoff. And you end up with, after all the hand-wringing about who was the best one-loss team and who was going to spoil this, you end up with the 2 undefeated teams playing in the national title game. So,
I say if Georgia was participating on Monday, they beat both teams. How about that?
You are not alone.
How about
you are
that
not
hot
alone
take?
in that belief. Not alone at all.
Yeah, well, it worked out great. Yeah, I mean, for me to watch it, and you know how I watch things now. I monitor some social. I see it's getting close. It's at the end of the game. All right, I'll watch. Yeah. Oh, look, overtime, fine. My son even came down. Focus group of 1 decided to watch the overtime. So that was good. He ended with why did they run that play?
I think a lot of people are asking.
I'm going to say he could be the host
Jackson.
of any sports radio station in America. He's ready at age 14. Why did they run that play?
Yeah.
Give me some of the numbers, though. We got, great ratings, which is great. Lots of people tuning in, like
Huge
you said.
Numbers,
Just give me great. What do you think it's going to be for your Michigan-Washington? I like when you have a little West Coast interest there, which is good. How many tens of millions? Over under 30.
Oh man,
obviously, if it's 35-7 at half, it's
of course
it's going to make it.
But
let's just say, give me close.
I'm going to
go under. 30.
I don't think Washington is a huge draw. It's been a while since they were here.
Yeah.
The Pac-12 is falling apart, which we can get to. Michigan is a huge draw for sure, but we're used to these playoffs that have Georgia in them or have Alabama in them, huge regional, massive followings. I don't think that Washington fully commands that, but I very likely going to be wrong with anything I say on a ratings prediction.
Let's cross the Rubicon of interest with Kirk Herbstreit's dog picking who's going to win.
Oh my gosh.
Throw one ball with one logo, another ball with the other logo, and see which one that dog chases.
I'm done with back. Ben. Yeah, Ben is dead to me.
I said that just for you.
I know.
Who was it on Twitter that said it takes a lot to get me to hate it?
Golden retriever.
A golden retriever.
That was Bud Elliott, as a big college football reporter. I thought that was a great tweet. So this is Scott. The Michigan is the bluest of the blue bloods. I'm just looking at the numbers here that our colleague Lev Akabas put together.
Go check it out. By the way, this was great. If you want a snapshot of the football programs and from a financial standpoint, go take a look. It's just he did Washington, Michigan by the numbers. And it's really, really great work.
Michigan football brings in $47 million in ticket sales every year. That's the Big House, obviously one of the biggest, if not the biggest, stadiums in the country. They bring in $30 million in donations, $40 million in media rights, a number that is going to go up significantly. In the past 2 years, and will continue to go up moving forward. It really does highlight, in my opinion, this particular matchup highlights everything that's changing in college sports, right? Washington is here representing the Pac-12, but will not be in the Pac-12 very long. Washington and Oregon's departure from the Pac-12 at the 13th hour a couple months ago is essentially the reason the Pac-12 fell apart. They are going to the Big Ten because of the media number that I just mentioned for Michigan. The fact that the Big Ten schools are about to be sharing $50, $55, $60 million a year each in TV money was a figure that Washington and Oregon and everyone else in the Pac-12 and now all the schools in the ACC could not refuse. So in some ways, the financial gap we see right now between Michigan and Washington, two of the best, if not the two best college football teams in the country, highlights the exact reason why college football and college sports are changing so drastically in the next few years.
All right, stop looking at the screen. Let's have some fun. Total expenses, Michigan or Washington? Who's higher? And I know you've looked at it, but probably didn't remember.
You mean for the football team? I mean, I know the answer to
team.
that. Yeah.
Okay.
The football team I know is Washington, which is surprising for some.
$70 million versus $52 million. A little bit of surprising. Let's have some fun. Let's see. Who spends more on travel, Michigan or Washington?
I would think Michigan, just regionally, is my guess.
$2.2 million to $1.9, Michigan.
Yeah.
Let's see. Which one on who spends more on recruiting, Michigan or Washington?
That one I think maybe Washington, just because of where they have to go to recruit.
Michigan, 2.2 to 1.5.
Okay.
Let me have some good ones here. Severance payments, Michigan or Washington?
That's Washington. Michigan hasn't had a severance payment
exactly.
in a while, right? Harbaugh's been there for long enough.
But by the way, 2 free agent coaches. Talk about cashing in.
100%. Yeah, I was hoping you were going to bring it up.
Because you have coaches, staff, the whole staff compensation. And I would have thought about Michigan, $16.4 million for the entire coaching staff compensation. That's going to be Harbaugh alone next year.
Yeah. There's talk I saw of a 10-year, $125 million offer for Jim Harbaugh if he's willing to stick around in Michigan. Those talks, from what I understand, were kind of tabled a little bit when the whole cheating scandal came out, and maybe now have resumed. And then on the other end, Kalen DeBoer, who I think for a lot of college football fans, not a huge name, but he's not a particularly well compensated coach. Certainly not for this tier of success right now.
The entire staff, $8.4 million at Washington.
Yeah, so the entire staff is making less than Michigan State's coach is making, or coach was making before he was let go. So and I don't know if this was intentional or not, but it sounds like they've been talking for months about a new contract, and those talks got delayed as the season was going out. Yeah, yesterday's price, not today's price, Scott. I think Kalen DeBoer, his team is playing his way into a very, very hefty pay bump, either by Washington or, because we see this happen all the time, maybe even a bigger program with even more money to come swoop him away at some point soon.
Michigan probably thought they were going to have some leverage in those talks with the suspension and everything, but here you go, win a national championship. Guess what?
It's changed.
Yeah. Ask the fans. Ask all the fans, whether it's Dave Portnoy, Tom Brady, Steve Ross. Ask anybody who roots for Michigan whether they care about this thing at this point. Nope, don't care. And here's the last one I'll do just for fun. And this one surprises me, because obviously the number of people are the same, and they're big boys. How much do you think Michigan spends to feed its student athletes, as they say, versus Washington? Who spends more on food?
I would think it would be Michigan, is my guess.
Now, why do you think? Now, I'm curious. That this is one of those where I take the next step. My brain works that way. Why do you think? I would have thought Washington would spend more on food. I just thought it would have been like, hey, I don't know, the price of fish,
just local seafood.
Local seafood. Yeah, I just thought it would have been higher.
Michigan's just shopping at Zingerman's.
I'll put it to you this way: the difference between the two is almost as much as Washington spends in total.
That does not surprise me. My thinking there is that the bigger, your richest programs, as we've talked about before, Scott, are flush with money and are trying to figure out ways to spend it that is not paying players. And the way they do that is they find
avocados from Mexico.
Yeah, glitzy, fancy locker room, and Clemson has a slide in its football facility,
but you're thinking
a nice weight room. I would bet that whatever the food options are in the Michigan football locker room or practice facility are so much nicer than what even a high-end Pac-12 school like Washington offers. That number does not surprise me much at all.
All right, so the number is Michigan $3.5 million on meals, Washington $2 million.
Yeah,
that's a big gap. I got to say, that really does surprise me. Better food, you think? The training table for Michigan football players, or the overall dining centers at Bowdoin College?
Great question. I mean, think about your focus group of one, for example, right? When he's going to start looking at schools at some point, in terms of things that he's going to care about when he's looking at hockey facilities, right? He's going to care about the weight room and care about the locker room and the care
about the weight room.
Stadium.
That means you got to go in the weight room and actually work hard. You greatly overestimate my focus group of one.
I think some of the things that kids of that age care about are uniforms, right? That kind of things. Yep. Looking at what the athletes are eating, what the dining hall looks like, what the options are. Those are all things that I actually do think influence a recruiting trip almost just as much as some of the more specific details of what the roster looks like, who the coach is, et cetera. So,
by the way, I don't think that's athlete specific, and I didn't just pull the Bowdoin College analogy out of nowhere. I will tell you, have I discussed this with you? I don't remember if you and I discussed this. I like the Revisionist History podcast by Malcolm Gladwell.
Okay.
I would encourage everybody, a little recommendation, we don't do this often, but there is one episode, just Google Malcolm Gladwell, Revisionist History, whatever, Bowdoin College. And in essence, they were talking about looking at dining hall food to talk about the income inequality in terms of campuses and where they put the money. And I think they looked between Bowdoin and Vassar. And Bowdoin made a decision that the money they bring in from very wealthy student body is going to go to things like, fresh avocado and things like that. Really, really Michelin star quality food, because that's what people who pay a lot of money want. And then they asked the folks at Vassar to make a very different choice, where you're not going to have a very fancy dorm. You're not going to have great food in the dining halls. However, they want you to know that a lot of that money is being spent on financial aid to help diversify the student body, if that matters to you. It was just a really, really interesting look at two schools and the approaches and how to extrapolate it as to what it meant for the university. So I look at it that way. Like if I'm a football player, and I'm really still surprised there's $1.5 million. How do you get $1.5 million difference between what you're spending at Michigan? Because what are these, like, what do they want? Steaks? Like everybody's eating filet? Versus Chuck, like how is there $1.5 million difference in these two marquee programs?
I would be, and we don't know exactly how the accounting works out here, but I wouldn't be shocked
if
that Michigan number includes workforce, right? So nutritionists. It might include a number of chefs. It might include the facility itself. I think there's a lot that goes into. That's not just the type of food, shrimp versus fresh fish or whatever.
Sign me up if it's the seafood. Yeah,
I think there's a chance that if you told me Michigan had every football player at Michigan was on a tailored health plan, specifically in terms of balancing
everybody
protein
gets a personal
and
chef.
Carbohydrates, depending on their specific way their
body
burns those
They do
things.
blood work. How about that? They take blood work and then they say what you should optimally be eating.
If you told me Michigan did that and Washington didn't, that would not surprise me at all. So
I
I think there's a lot of ways that you can balance that.
All right, I like it, but that's what you get on this podcast. Nowhere else are you hearing about, like, that is not happening anywhere else. And frankly,
Bowdoin College,
I'm going this
athletes.
way. I know ratings matter and I know listeners matter. I don't care if you like that or not. That is awesome content right there. That I want to listen to two people having that conversation, bringing that in. Anyway, you know what I don't want to listen to?
Is it Aaron Rodgers on the Pat McAfee show?
That's exactly it. And that's just because I'm old and tired. And by the way, and you said it before, and I'm like, who watches the McAfee Altcast? And it was like over 1 million plus. I get it. And you just keep saying the same. When I say who, every time I start a sentence in the office with who watches, you turn to me and say,
it's not for you.
It's not for you.
It's not for you. It's not for me either, to be clear.
I understand. Give me your partner's response to Pat McAfee. Give me the time comparison. Usain Bolt in the 100 versus Janet watching Pat McAfee. Who got out fastest?
Yeah, Usain Bolt 100, but Usain Bolt 200 was pretty close, I think. I think Janet made it about 20 seconds into watching the sideline show last year's national championship game with Pat and his colleagues essentially screaming on the sideline for
it's a scream fest.
But the studio show, and we'll transition into the news of this week and what Aaron Rodgers, who's a recurring guest, a paid guest on that show. But ESPN handed the afternoon keys over to Pat McAfee. It is the flagship afternoon sports talk show on ESPN, which is very high-profile real estate. And I know he's not for everybody, but the fact that ESPN did that, I think, shows what they're looking for, right? They're not looking for you. They're not looking for me. They're looking for your son. They want the younger sports
fans. Fair enough, though. When I put on the Allcast, too, focus group of one was much like Janet. The response was, "What is this?"
That's interesting. Yeah. that is I think that's more telling than you or I.
That should scare them more than
Janet
me saying,
turning
I don't
it
want
on
to
and
watch
being
this.
like, what is going on?
But when
here?
things go south, and I'm not saying when they go south,
yeah,
between McAfee and ESPN, And if anybody dares ask, well, who saw that coming? I can do this. I can raise my
can
hand,
definitely
and you
do
can
that.
raise your hand. And lots of people said, this is not going to work.
Pat has not lasted too long at most of his prior stops, right? Barstool, FanDuel, and ESPN is a step above both those for him from a platform standpoint. But I would also not be shocked if Pat is somewhere, if he's at Fox in 2 years or in 12 months.
Just do his own thing, man.
I do think the challenge here for ESPN is the push and pull that you and I are talking about, which is that as a lot of this stuff just kind of shifts into shock jock kind of hot takes and more controversial takes, you end up in this tough position, right? Where there's a large subset of the country who wants more of that, right? They are the people watching ESPN on a Wednesday afternoon might want that. But the truth is that I'm sure a lot of ESPN advertisers don't love the idea that a paid guest on a show can come out and hint at the idea of another very public celebrity of being a Jeffrey Epstein associate. I think there is, I think that this is the challenge, I think, for ESPN is catering to some of those desires while not losing the other part of its business. I think is a genuine concern. It's one they've been dealing with for a while and will continue to become a bigger and bigger challenge.
All right, so Bob Iger's phone rings, doesn't ring. And you have to keep in mind, like you have parent company here, Disney, overarching, ABC, that has Jimmy Kimmel.
Yeah, exactly.
ESPN, which has McAfee, and now they're paying Aaron Rodgers to appear. Does the phone ring at the highest level say, just want to let you know we have a little situation here?
And we're recording this on Wednesday early afternoon. Pat's about to go live. I'm sure he will address this.
By the way, I am on board with Larry David. Today's Wednesday, as you say. I don't want to hear Happy New Year after today.
Yeah,
I don't even want to hear it today.
Out there.
I don't want to hear it today, but I will. I'll deal with it. But tomorrow, it not only feels too late, it is too late. No.
You have the first full week of the year to say Happy New Year to people.
Totally disagree.
Okay. Well, you and
totally
I
disagree.
agree to disagree on that.
So, but are people tuning in? And that I always call it the Howard Stern experience, right? It was like half the people tuned into Howard Stern because they loved him. A whole bunch of people tuned into Howard Stern because they didn't like him. And then a whole bunch of people tuned into Howard Stern just to see what he would say next. That's what I get is what's going on here with Pat McAfee and Aaron Rodgers. It's just aggregate eyeballs, right? The old John Skipper, aggregate the eyeballs. I will figure out how to monetize it.
But again, you and I we're not watching Pat McAfee because we dislike the show. We're just not watching it, right? Like I would be surprised if there's a lot of people who are kind of hate watching that content. But I just think that there is an increasingly larger percentage of the ESPN watching audience that wants Pat and in some ways wants Aaron, right? I mean, and I won't group the two of them together, but I think the Aaron Rodgers kind of coming off the cuff as a recurring guest and speaking his mind and his kind of weird warped version of truth telling. I think
I care about conspiracy theories from anybody. I don't know.
You and I agree on this, Scott. I just think that again, this is the separation of what consumers want in some ways, and a company like ESPN that is kind of desperately trying to hold all of its audiences together, and that becomes a harder and harder task.
Do you think it's the kind of thing where everybody now has to one up last week to keep the share of eyeballs and attention? That you constantly have to be, whether it's a wrestling show or not, you have to jump a little higher. The top rope has to be. It's got to be, a squared thing, a circle, a cage match, or more blood, or whatever.
I think that's been baked into the First Take, Stephen A. Smith, Skip Bayless, Shannon Sharp business model for years. I think that even if there's nothing to be outraged at, those guys have to find something to be outraged.
Well, you create.
Right?
Well, you make the statement to create their outrage, and then you talk about the controversy that you've created.
And then you get angry at the backlash to the controversy that you started because there was no controversy or no backlash.
And away we go. But by the way, semi-genius, because if we know there's a reason. Like we actually know why the E comes first. It just happenstance. But it is just entertainment.
No, I think that's right. But yes, I do think that model worked for a decade and a half, 15 years, whatever. And I think you can make an argument that Pat and Aaron are on the vanguard of the new model, right? Which is a little bit more salacious and a bit more polarizing. Yeah. But because the country is more polarizing and therefore sports fans are more polarized, I think there is a wider critique or thing to say about what sports talk shows or even what sports coverage looks like as the country gets more polarized.
You know what I would tune into? I would loyally tune into the NFL if you guaranteed me that with 5 minutes to go in any game that had a point differential of 17, I'll say, I think we're pretty safe, that the owner of one team would douse opposing fans with some liquid that he'd been taking in the owner's box. I would tune in every game at the 5-minute mark to watch the dousing. How about you?
If they did pay-per-view and enough people bought it, they could
99 cents for the last 5 minutes.
Could pay the fine that the NFL would inevitably hand down. David Tepper, of course, you're referencing here.
Oh, right. Yes. Yes. In case you don't know.
Panthers owner threw it on video, throwing what looked like a drink or ice or maybe both at a Jacksonville Jaguars fan. Go Jags!
It wasn't you, was it?
It was not. It was not me.
As soon as I heard Tepper douse the Jaguars fan, I'm like, oh God, tell me Novi Williams wasn't at the game today.
Yeah, I'm of two minds on this one, Scott. It is I fully understand that the owner of an NFL team, a billionaire, should
I'm
never
really
be
interested to see where you're going with. I'm of two minds. What?
I'm of two minds. I should never be throwing.
Yes,
should be
that's
never
the
be throwing
one mind that I can agree with you. Where's the other mind?
The other mind is I think the outrage was way too big. The
really?
idea that the team hasn't commented yet, David hasn't commented yet, the NFL hasn't commented yet. The NFL fined him $300,000, which is a lot of money in some ways, not a lot of money to David Tepper.
That is the equivalent for the average American's equivalent of $1.10.
I think in the pantheon of things that owners do that I find problematic. And we have a long list of accusations and allegations, workplace all of that stuff. The idea that all of this hand-wringing happened because David Tepper threw some water or some vodka, whatever it was, on a fan through a window.
I have to jump in, though. I have to jump
in. By all means.
When you're talking pantheon, all the things that sit atop that pantheon have resulted in some owners losing their teams.
No, that's not true. Some of them.
Donald Sterling. No, some. Yeah, ultimately, Dan Snyder was forced out. I mean, ultimately, some have been removed from the team. But you don't.
Eventually, Dan Snyder. There were 20 years of ugly allegations against Dan Snyder.
I didn't say the wheels of justice are round. They're square. The wheels of justice are certainly square.
A $300,000 fine. I mean, and Dan Snyder was fined at one point a bit by the NFL at the end, obviously, and it was millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. But for 2 decades,
after he'd sold it for $4 billion or $6 billion,
yes, that's also true. I just think that there is the fact that everyone's freaking out over this.
I just think it's on video. I mean, there's allegations and stories, and then there's David Tepper, net worth $17 billion, acting like a fool. Sorry, David, sitting in section 400 and whatever. It's on tape.
Yes.
I saw it, which makes all the difference in the world. Just come on, dude, what are you doing?
And was it Bud Adams? I think it was Bud Adams who was fined for
the
middle fingers.
Yeah, the two-gun salute.
Throwing the bird 2 decades ago, and that was a $250,000.
But let me extrapolate why this is sports business. I'm going to extrapolate, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you're worth $17 billion. You've done very well in your core finance business, right?
Yep.
You buy a team because you love sports. You want it. I don't think that many owners are prepared for just how high profile this stuff is. That every move you make is like, this is front porch stuff. The teams are the front porch. You are going to get so much attention. When you die, your obit is going to be former, Charlotte owner. That's the way it works, right? I don't care how many billions you did and whatever. That's going to be multi-billionaire David Tepper, former owner or owner of. That's going to be up there on the headstone. So they're not prepared for that. That's one. 2, the same amount of control you had in terms of success and failure that you have in your core business, you do not have on the football field. And it's a weird feeling. I remember asking, who was it? I said, what's it? Oh, I asked Dan Gilbert years ago. You've heard this story. Hey, what's it like to be LeBron's boss? And Dan Gilbert's response was much like Gordon Gee asking about the football coach. LeBron doesn't have a boss. What a weird business where you're going to spend billions of dollars to get an asset, and in reality, your employee doesn't really have to listen to you.
Yeah.
I'm not playing. What happens when LeBron James says, you know what? Trade me. Yeah. I'm not going to. No. So I'm just saying it's a weird dynamic. So this is the story I want us to write, and I'm going to broadcast it here. And of course, other people will do it before we get to it. But why is David Tepper so frustrated? He's been through so many coaches, executives, couldn't get the practice facility built.
Lost a lot of money on the practice facility.
Is he having
a lot of money?
Is he having any fun with this? Is he enjoying himself, or are we going to be shocked one day we're going to get a statement from Tepper Sports and Entertainment that he's decided to sell the team?
If you and I were listing teams that could sell, the NFL teams that would not surprise us if it sold this year, yep. I have the Seahawks and the Panthers as, I think, 1 and 2, or 2 and 1, depending on how I think about it. As most likely, we've been hearing these whispers for a long time. To add to your point, Scott, about how weird a dynamic is, not only is it a weird dynamic going down to players, but the NFL is such a collectivized business model in some ways that you're also you're not really even in some ways the decision maker over your own team. You're 1/32 of a decision maker over a collection of teams, and there's so much autonomy in the investment hedge fund world that he came from, to go from that to suddenly being in a group that has to balance the interests of everybody for the collective good of the sport,
act in concert for the
which
collective
the
good,
NFL has done so effectively. It's one of the reasons why the business is so strong right now. But yeah, I think depending on the industry you come from, and hedge fund being one of the more extreme ones, coming into this business environment is a shock to the system.
Yeah, absolutely.
And David is definitely clearly struggling with the nuance of how to build the business and the successful football team simultaneously.
It is one of the reasons that people buy the limited partnerships in teams first, like Josh Harris did in the Steelers, and there's a reason
David
why.
did, right? He was in the Steelers as well. Is that right?
And you wonder, like, exactly, how much time did he spend, or it's what is this for me? It's a good training ground for is this for me?
Yeah,
but it's a whole different ball of wax being the assistant coach and the coach. Being an LP, nobody cares. When you are the control owner of a sports team and anything goes wrong, the cameras point to you. You need to be the face, the voice, the conscience of the franchise. And some folks just aren't. I'm not saying David is or isn't. I'm just saying, but it ain't an easy place to be.
Yeah.
So you just wanted to buy this thing for whatever reason. It's not like David. People knew who David Tepper was, but I would say the average Joe had no idea who he was. You're in finance, you know who he is. But who's David Tepper? Like, who was Mikhail Prokhorov before he bought the Brooklyn Nets? Right? I don't know, some Russian oligarch, right? That was it. That's all you knew. All of a sudden, you buy the Brooklyn Nets, you are legitimized in anything else you're trying to do. Oh, yeah, he's the owner of the Nets. Okay, I got it. Good. It's a real fast way to become really famous globally. And that's a tough spot to be sometimes. So who's maybe in that training ground department
real quick before we move on, just to put a final point on the point I was making before we really started talking about Tepper. Jim Irsay in 2014 he pleaded guilty to misdemeanor count of operating a vehicle while intoxicated.
Yep.
Was fined $500,000 by the league. Mm-hmm. To me, if an owner who is driving while intoxicated is getting a $500,000 fine from the league, and an owner who is throwing a drink on a fan is getting a $300,000 fine, to me those things are drastically disproportionate to each other. That's the point I'm trying to make. Is that that it seems like the outcry over what is a thing he should not be doing, but albeit like a very silly, harmless thing to do, is very different should be very different than how the NFL treats way more serious allegations. And sometimes I don't think that's true.
I would say this as a retort.
Yeah.
Anything that prompts people to take a closer look at the behavior of NFL owners scares the bejesus out of that group.
Agreed.
So looking inwardly, saying, what is the risk to me? He's got to be made to know that you can't do that. We just came off of Snyder. Stop. Nobody needs to be sit in your thing, cheer for your team. That is it. Kiss babies.
Close the window next time.
Yeah, donate to charity. Close the glass. Whatever you need to do. That's it. Do not give David access to the outside world. For now. That's the way we want to go. You see Kraft sitting in his thing. You see Jerry Jones, and they know when they're on camera. And all right, whatever. But anything that invites further scrutiny, bringing untoward, whatever it is toward the league.
Tarnishing the shield. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. You're protecting the shield. The shield is the owner, or are the owners, and sort of this cash machine that they collectively own. Anything that brings risk to that will be dealt with harshly. So, again, it's $1.10 for you and me, so you can argue whether it's harsh.
Yeah.
But I think they made their point, David, not the way to go.
Don't do it again.
Someone else, we broke the news of somebody else buying a limited piece of a team. That's Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO. He is among the group that's backing A-Rod and Mark Lore in the T-Wolves. We believe the valuation was around 2.1. So A-Rod was seeking more for this tranche. And it was a weird deal where they over time got control of the team. So looks as if they will have 80% of the team now. Whether or not they take the remaining 20%, you and I are kind of eager to see. Yeah. But interesting that Eric Schmidt is kind of big name now in the mix of pro sports after buying into, did we mention Dan Snyder? As part of the group buying into the Commanders. So another person, even Eric Schmidt, people know who Eric Schmidt is. Right? Yeah. This is not a low-profile person. But if Eric Schmidt what do you think? Well, let's say we walked down, let's do the Donald Trump thing now. Let's walk down Fifth Avenue. You and I, we walk down Fifth Avenue, 100 people. Who was Eric Schmidt? How many? No, boom, former Google CEO.
2?
Well, I go higher. I'm going to play
5?
Higher. But it ain't a lot higher. Exactly.
Not,
Eric Schmidt buys a professional sports team. A month after that, we walk down Fifth Avenue asking, who's Eric Schmidt?
Agreed. 100% agree with that.
That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, for sure. And to dive into the Timberwolves for a second, this is one of the weirder sports team sale takeovers that we've seen. I would love to ask Adam Silver at some point if he would ever approve a deal like this again. My hunch says probably not. But the rough nuts and bolts for folks who are listening who are curious, Mark Lore and Alex Rodriguez reached an agreement 3 years ago to buy the Timberwolves in a 4-part transaction where they would buy 20% right then at a $1.5 billion valuation, another 20% the next year.
Did you ever watch Popeye? You know Wimpy?
No. I know Popeye, but I don't know Wimpy.
He would say, I would gladly pay you for a burger, I will gladly pay you tomorrow for a burger today. I will gladly pay you tomorrow for a NBA team today.
Yeah, so 20%, then another 20%, then another 40%, which is where we are right now. The escalators in the deal go up from 1.5, very small. I was told 4% for each tranche or something like that. So, and in that time, Scott, as you know, NBA valuations soared. The idea of the Timberwolves selling for something that begins with a 1 is crazy right now. So Alex and Mark
sacrilegious to Kurt Badenhausen
are out there able to raise money at a higher valuation than their own deal. Certainly, even still, if it's 2.1, very low, well below market value right now. If the Timberwolves were to sell tomorrow, control stake, it would sell for so much more than what Alex and Mark are getting. I do wonder if executing this deal and then having Alex and Mark spend 3 years trying to raise money from private equity groups or rich individuals like Eric Schmidt, all to take over a team that they really couldn't afford at a well below market value price. My hunch is this would never have gotten approved if it was the NFL, for example. And I wonder if a deal like this in the future, if the NBA would say, no, either you buy it up front at this price or we have to have something else that protects us from valuation soaring and suddenly you being locked in at a massive discount.
Speaking, by the way, of owners and selling and bad behaviors and things, Portland Thorns. So I could have had an example right here, right here at the end of the show. We're going to talk about the Bethal family buying the Portland Thorns. That's done. $63 million. Your takeaway, and obviously the stadium, which was controlled by Merritt Paulson, was an interesting part of all this. But a guy kind of forced to sell his team, and that one's off the market.
Highest price ever paid for a control stake in an NWSL franchise, Scott. As we talk about NBA valuations soaring, NWSL valuations also soaring in the past few years. I think the most interesting part of this to us has been the relationship between the Thorns and the Timbers. The Paulson family owned both of them, had to sell the Thorns. Not only do they own the Timbers, they control Providence Park, where both teams play. And the Thorns essentially were operated via the Timbers. All of the general counsel,
shared
HR, sponsorship, ticket sales.
As you would expect, by the way.
All of that was done essentially by shared teams. So when you buy the Thorns, what do you get if you lose all of the Timbers support? That was one of the big questions in the sale, which took over a year. And from what I understand, there is a service agreement as part of the acquisition in which the Paulson family is going to continue to provide some of that support
rental, we'll call
for
it,
at least a little bit of time to get the Bethal family in and able to build out their own infrastructure. And then there is an agreement to keep playing in Providence Park for a long time after that as well. So a more complex transaction than we see often, just because of the inner working relationship between the previous owner and what the buyer was going to be getting. But in the end, another big number for the NWSL. The OL Reign, another team that are out there for sale, Scott. According to our reporting, it looks like they're close with the Sounders and Carlisle Group. It's going to be a number, I think, a little bit below 63 million, but no matter how you slice it, these are NWSL teams are going for significantly higher than they were even 2 years ago. And people that got in, like Michelle Kang, who people thought was crazy to buy the Washington Spirit for $35 million, looking like a huge bargain now 24 months later.
Yep. All right. So answer the question and then close the show. If you could pie chart cut up the brains of the Timbers Thorns executives, what percentage of mind share were they spending on Timbers versus Thorns?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
I would think. I would like to think that some of them were tasked specifically with maybe helping out the Thorns more than others. But
you think they were all right? You're Thorns specific, Thorns only.
I would like to think that seems like the smarter way to do it. But given the valuations, what do we think the Timbers are worth? Let's say I'm not looking at the list. 600 million, something like that. So
more, considerably more.
Yeah. So maybe
80-20, 70-30. Where are you going? And then close the show. I'm not even going to argue with you. I'm not even going to comment. I'm just curious for your take.
We are going with 80-20.
No, I was kidding. I was going to just joke there. Say, no, you're wrong. No.
That is my final answer. Scott, Happy New Year to you. Since this is the last day I can say it. You can wish Scott a Happy New Year on Twitter at Soshnick. I am Eben Novi Williams. You can wish me a Happy New Year on Twitter at Novi_Williams. Happy New Year to Erin Greenewald, our producer. Thank you very much to Erin for everything that she does. Sportico's digital media editor, Cora Veltman, would like you to know that you can follow the show at Sporticast, which is the hub of the Sportico Media Network.